Hi, everybody. Welcome. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you're coming to us from. My name is Whitney or Whit. I'm a GMAT GRE EA instructor at Manhattan Prep and super excited to be with you today to talk to you about the new GMAT Focus and particularly the data insights section, since that's the thing that is going to be the most new in many ways. But welcome to all of you. I'm in Durham, North Carolina, so it is 11:30 here on the East Coast on a kind of rainy, gloomy day. So even more excited to be inside and hanging out with y'all. So today we've got quite a few things to go through. You may have noticed if you were here early that we mentioned that we will be going through some practice questions a bit later in the presentation. And so please have a pen and paper ready. You will want to do some work. We will also be leaving, I will also be leaving some time for some Q&As as we get a little bit deeper into the session. So by all means, make sure you've got your questions ready. You're always welcome to add them into the comments. But again, welcome. My name is Whitney or Whit. I'm here with Manhattan Prep, powered by Kaplan. And we are going to talk about the data insights section, right? This is brand new. None of us have really seen this before. The only information, as many of you know, that we have was in many ways accidentally leaked. And then there's a little bit of information that's slowly coming out from GMAC themselves. And so we're going to go through what we know, what we think we know, and I'll let you know what we're speculating on. And then we'll take a little bit of time to practice. So today, the plan, I want you to make sure that you understand how does this new data insight section fit into the new GMAT Focus. So what will be after this time next year be the GMAT, right? There won't be this legacy GMAT that we're dealing with right now. And we want to talk about what's new on that section. So I know for many of you that are here live, right now, we still have this legacy GMAT that is available for the next little bit of time. And so if you've already been studying for that legacy GMAT, then you know a lot about various question types on the test that will also be part of GMAT Focus, the new, and as soon as later, 2024, the current GMAT. Yeah. And so what I want to focus on is what's shifting or what's changing slightly, and think about how best to prepare for that. So what's new and how do we get ourselves ready? So a little bit about the GMAT Focus exam. Your score will be valid for 5 years, just like the legacy GMAT. And you can take the test 5 times in a calendar year, again, just like the legacy GMAT. You also have to wait 16 days between retakes, just like the legacy GMAT. Now, some things we don't know. We do not know what the costs will be for either test center or online. So we're still waiting on those details to be released. Now, we do know that the score itself, you'll be getting a 205 to an 805, very similar to the legacy. The legacy was 5 points lower, but so this GMAT Focus will be from 205 to 805. We have no idea, and it'll be some time before there's an average GMAT score at the top 20 business schools. We'll need some actual data, so there'll be a couple of years from now, at least where we're sitting here live, a couple of years before we have numbers for this. And then just a little bit about the overall kind of like rules. It looks like, yes, there will be a calculator allowed on data insight, but not on quant. For anyone who's prepared for the executive assessment, very similar. At the end of each section, there's this kind of interesting review. And so, right, the legacy GMAT was always forward moving, right? You have to answer a question before you can move to the next one. End of story. On the executive assessment, within little half panels, you can skip around. It appears that the GMAT Focus exam is going to kind of bring those two things together a bit. So on this GMAT Focus, you'll have to move forward through the exam. So you can't go back and like click forward and back or skip things and return. However, you are able to mark questions. And at the end of each of the 3 sections that we'll talk about, at the end of each of those 3 sections, you'll have the opportunity to change up to 3 answers. So I'm not entirely sure how that's going to play out and what the best advice will be for that yet. We'll have to actually see how some of those tests work in practice. But for now, do know that in many ways, the GMAT Focus is going to have that same forward moving aspect of the legacy GMAT, with this one caveat that you can go back and switch up to 3 answers if you have time left at the end of the section. So this won't be an extra time. This still has to be the time that's within the section itself. Now, the results are going to be available immediately, just like they are for the legacy GMAT. And it seems as if, MBA programs will be considering your highest reported score, whereas just like with the legacy GMAT, that they'll look at whatever your highest total score. You won't be able to send different partial scores. So you won't be able to tell them, here's my highest quant, here's my highest verbal, here's my highest data insights. But you can select which scores you'll be sending to each school. So a little bit of selection, but it's basically what's already in place from the GMAT Legacy edition, and now will be the same for GMAT Focus. So let's look at sort of our bigger picture shifts. On the legacy GMAT, we had 4 sections. We had a quant section, a verbal section, an integrated reasoning, like data section, and an essay. So the first thing you'll note is that this new GMAT Focus only has 3 sections. It's got quant, it's got verbal, it's got a data section. The essay is conspicuously missing, thank goodness. And what we know is that all 3 of these are going to come together to give us our overall score of 205 to 805. And it looks like you'll be able to choose which order, or at least there will be some order selection, probably not infinite numbers, but there will be some order selection of which section you do first, which is fantastic. We can play to our strengths. We can consider what areas we do better cold versus which areas need more of a warm up. And we can apply that here. So to look at each section, the quant section, all the sections, in fact, are 45 minutes long. The question numbers for each section are a little bit different. What we see is that for the quant section, you'll have 21 questions. All of them will be problem solving. So this is the GMAT language for multiple choice, where it looks like a traditional multiple choice test. The answer choices are numeric or maybe small words, but they're changing all the time. And the content seems like it'll be very much the same mix that we're used to in some ways, we'll talk a little bit about what's shifting, but things like, and we talk about this in some of the other workshops that we're doing with GMAT Club. But one of the things that will be missing is, geometry, for example. But otherwise, these will feel very much like legacy GMAT questions, not terribly different. The verbal section, however, is definitely going to be different in a more substantial way, I think, for many of us. So 45 minutes, only 23 questions. So a couple of additional questions compared to quant. So you have to be a little bit crisper, and we have to do that without the sentence correction question type that was available on the legacy GMAT. So GMAT Focus will only be reading and analysis. So it's reading comprehension and critical reasoning. So the logic and the sort of digging in. Now, each of our scores will be in a range from 6 to 90, and same for verbal. And it's actually going to be the same for data insights, that you'll get a sub-score, just like the legacy gave you a sub-score. The focus will also give you a sub-score. Data insights is a new-ish section in the sense that it is bringing together questions that are not new, but combined in a way that is. So it appears that the data insight section will be 20 questions. It'll be made up of the data sufficiency that is being pulled out of the quant section, and it's being brought together with the integrated reasoning question types. So the 4 question types of integrated reasoning that are tables, graphs, multi-source reasoning, and 2-part analysis. We're going to look at those today. That's our primary focus. This area is going to be that mixture of quantitative and verbal skills. Again, a score from 6 to 90. Yeah. Okay, so big picture. And again, we've got some other workshops we're doing with GMAT Club. So check us out for more specifics on exactly how everything's changing. Today, though, I really want to focus on this data insights section. And it's, for me, really important because this is the one area that folks who are, in fact, already studying for the legacy GMAT and considering moving to the Focus Edition when it becomes available, this is going to be the place where we have to change what we're doing a bit. Because on the old right? The classic edition of the GMAT, the legacy edition, we didn't really have this importance of integrated reasoning. And so let's look at how the proportions of our new like focus edition are going to stack up against what was happening with the old test. So each section, as best as we can understand, will be equally weighted in thirds. This is very much like the executive assessment, where integrated reasoning, quant, and verbal have equal thirds. The number of questions, again, right? 21 of all problem solving for quant, 23 total, a mix of reading comp and critical reasoning. We estimate that there will be more reading comp than critical reasoning. That's our prediction. Again, these numbers are all estimates. And then the data insight section with 20 questions, we believe this will look very much like a 12 question integrated reasoning, just like you would see on the legacy GMAT or on the executive assessment, with the addition of 8 data sufficiency, excuse me, to kind of fill in the section. Again, these are all estimates right now until we've started to see some real test sections, see some practice tests. So how do these question types weight into your score? Well, problem solving is now a full third of your overall score, which means that problem solving is, a little bit more than what it would have been before. So our estimates from before, that problem solving is about 28%. Relative was on the legacy GMAT was about 28% of your overall score. It's now about 33. For reading comp, the old GMAT 19 and 13 for reading comp critical reasoning, we're looking at those numbers being roughly the same for the new GMAT Focus Edition. But where we really see the big shift is now, instead of this like 22% data sufficiency. So data sufficiency had a pretty heavy weight before, where all the IR just like wasn't really relevant in your score. What we've got now is that data sufficiency is actually quite a bit less important, and integrated reasoning is actually now playing a role in the overall score. So the GMAT Focus is going to feel a lot more, in terms of weights, is going to feel a lot more like the executive assessment, with integrated reasoning question types being important. Now, on executive assessment, integrated reasoning question types are together make up a third. Now we're looking at them together making up about 20% of the test. So they're still not quite as important as they are on the EA, but they're getting much more important than they were on the legacy GMAT. Yeah. So again, a lot of this is speculation. Once we know the breakdown of question numbers, we have these kind of weights a little bit more accurately. But for now, these are what we'd argue are pretty good guesses. Now, what we do know for sure, or at least from what's been, leaked or shared, is we know it's a 45-minute section with 20 questions. We know that the formats will include data sufficiency and integrated reasoning. And we know that those integrated reasoning question types are extraordinarily likely to include the 4 that we've been seeing on EA and on GMAT Legacy all this time. And they would integrate quant and verbal skills the exact way that they do on the EA and in the Legacy. You will get an on-screen calculator during data insights, right? You do not get this during the quant section, but this is the same. This is the same as you get for EA. This is the same as you get for Legacy, no different. And then finally, we've got this, like, what GMAC has told us is that they think, and what they're selling to business schools, is that this section measures candidates' ability to analyze and interpret data, and then in fact apply it. And so got a question in the chat window while we're sort of sitting here. Is the current version, meaning the legacy version, going to become obsolete? Yes, it will. Right now, how long will that take? Well, legacy GMAT scores are valid for 5 years. So the last of the legacy tests, I believe, will be, they've mentioned it would be early 2024 that they would stop offering those. And so people taking the legacy GMAT into the beginning of 2024 can still use those scores for up to 5 years. And so my estimation is that we're looking at the applications that will be in 2028. That sort of application season would be the last of the legacy GMATs that people would be able to apply with. Yeah. But after that, yes, the legacy GMAT will become completely obsolete at that point because there won't be any legacy GMAT scores that are still valid, that could still be used to apply with. Okay, so that's several years, right? That's several years. But the legacy GMAT won't be available after, the spring of 2024, as we've been told. At that point, everyone will be switched over to the GMAT Focus Edition that will become available this fall of 2023. Okay, so what do we not know but highly suspect? Well, we don't know, but we have a really good guess about the question type mix. We really do think that because of the types of IR questions, and because of how many of each one you sort of need to present, we do still think that there will be 12 integrated reasoning questions mixed up from the 4 question types, along with 8 data sufficiency questions, right? So this would maintain the 12 IR question total from both the legacy GMAT and the EA. And it makes a little bit more sense because generally speaking, on the legacy GMAT and on the EA, the average time per question allotted for integrated reasoning is 2.5 minutes. And given the timing parameters on legacy GMAT for quants, the average time allotted for data sufficiency and problem solving is about 2 minutes. And so the best fit we can find for what would make sense for 20 questions, knowing what legacy looks like and knowing how much time the test sort of deems as appropriate for the different question types, we really do think that keeping the 12 question integrated reasoning mix and then adding in 8 data sufficiency questions fits both the number of questions and the time allotted for the section. So we have a pretty good guess that this is what the internal breakdown of questions within this new data insight section will look like. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so that's a great question. I mean, the fact is, great question in the window is like, which would B schools prefer, the legacy or focus? Very quickly, it's not going to be, they don't get to have a choice, right? So basically, as soon as we are in next year's, so 2024, so as soon as people are applying in fall of 2024, schools don't get to have a preference any longer because anyone who decides to apply to business school after the start of next year, after the start of 2024, won't have the option of taking the legacy GMAT. The only option will be the focus GMAT. And so the preference can't be a preference anymore. They will have to navigate how to accept both. It would not make sense for them to not accept both. I'm assuming they could say only focus, but that seems highly unlikely with people who are taking the exam right now, potentially delaying applications and wanting to use their score for the 5 years that it's valid. GMAC has confirmed that legacy GMAT scores will continue to be valid for 5 years. And so for the next 5-ish years, business schools will need to be able to accommodate both. Yep. No. So we are absolutely overhauling. We are creating new courses. We're creating new books. Obviously, we are not wanting to release a lot of those things until we have confirmation. But very soon, I mean, this year, the plan is we will start releasing coursework directly for GMAT Focus. So having courses specifically for folks who just want to target focus, those will be coming out this summer. So we will be moving to, by the time this test is available, having materials specifically for GMAT Focus. And then obviously once the GMAT Legacy has been retired and you can't take it any longer, then we will be retiring. I mean, they'd still be available for people who already have paid for access to them, but we'll be retiring any of our material that is no longer applicable. So for example, there won't be any more, kind of like sad day for me, but there won't be any more sentence correction. So we'll be pulling all of that out of our study materials and keeping, and I think that's true of any test prep company out there. We'll be making sure that we get you the exact materials you need. Now, while both tests are available, obviously we will continue to make legacy GMAT materials available so that people can keep studying for what they've already been studying for. But yes, once the legacy GMAT has been retired, so will all of our materials that were for legacy GMAT. So the OG for the Focus Edition, I don't have an exact date for that. It should be, I believe we've sort of been led to believe June or July. That gives you a couple of months before the test becomes available to actually take. That sounds like the right timeline. This was an accident. The fact is that no one was supposed to have known that this was sort of coming until the book was actually released. GMAC had inadvertently left on the look inside feature on their Amazon, on the Amazon listing for the book. And so when the new 2024 official guide was posted, like coming soon, pre-order, people were able to click on the look inside and immediately saw that the test was different. And so it was not all of this information was released earlier than GMAC had anticipated, which is good for us in some ways. I'm sure it was a bit of a scramble, but for them, I'm sure. But there will be, we should expect the book, like their official materials, to start to come out early this summer because they've said that the test will start to be available this fall. Now, here's what I would say. I would not. So I got a great question. Like there'll be a lack of study material, mock questions before and that would result in a lower score. That's actually not true. No new questions exist. None of what you would see on a GMAT Focus is new. They have introduced no new question types. Everything that'll be on the legacy or on the GMAT Focus was already on the legacy. And so all of the study materials in terms of practice questions are perfectly acceptable. The only thing that has to shift is kind of how we arrange them within section and thinking about timing benchmarks and that sort of thing. But there'll be plenty of time from the time practice materials are released to when first tests are able to be taken for you to tweak your test taking strategy. But the question types themselves are identical. If anything, they've just pulled things out so that you no longer have to study for them. So nothing is new or being added. Things are being shuffled and rearranged. So not a concern at all, in my opinion. Now, yes, there's always a concern because a test is brand new, right? And the formatting is brand new. And so there's something about that can be a little like, we don't know what to expect. But I am nowhere near as concerned about this shift as I was about the introduction of integrated reasoning back in 2012. Like that was a much bigger shift because it was questions that we'd never seen before, interfaces we'd never seen before, and almost nothing was released before it went live on the exams. Like no practice materials, nothing. And so for this update, I think if anything, a lot of us in this industry are really excited. We're excited for what might be some really positive changes. Some of it, we're all sad to see things like sentence correction go, but a lot of us are really happy to see geometry go. So, because geometry is not really useful in business school. So, yep. So what I would say is, and another great question is planning to take the GMAT Focus in November. Yes. If you know that you're going to be taking the GMAT Focus, you will not be taking the Legacy Edition, then absolutely use the current study materials that are available. And I might even suggest, if you don't have any study materials, another place to look for the quantitative stuff and extra integrated reasoning is in the executive assessment study materials, because executive assessment materials don't include geometry because there's no geometry in the executive assessment. And you've got a lot more integrated reasoning. We have no idea about experimental questions. We have to assume that, yes, there will be, that those will be built in, just like they are for the Legacy Edition, but we don't know what the details of that would be. Will percentile calculations be affected? No, because of the number of people? No. What tends to happen on these exams over time is what's called drift. Typically, the percentiles are sort of established around the median and the mean being the same. But then over time, as people learn the test and get better at it, there's often a drift. It's why you see now that the median quant score on the legacy edition is so much lower than the average, right, in some ways. So I wouldn't be worried about percentile calculations. Also, just keep in mind that, yes, this is new for us. This is new for y'all. The scores will be a little different. It's going to be new for business schools too. So they're going to be working to make sense of it. There'll be a lot more flexibility around this, I am certain, for the first at least couple of admission cycles, until they've started to see what the test looks like and what scores look like. So I would definitely be a little less like, oh gosh, what's happening? And just see it as, for those of you that are looking at taking exams in fall and early spring of 2023, 2024, you've got options, right? I think that's the kind of nice part to see, is that you've got two options. You can take both, right? Or either. Here's what we know. We're not certain, but we highly suspect that the IR question types will look very much like they currently do, similar mix, similar content areas. Like, we really do believe that a lot of that's going to be the same. It's not really going to change all that much. So wouldn't be super worried about that. Let's look. Okay. And so last but not least, DS question content. Here's where we're a little, like, this is where we're probably the least sure. So we suspect, which is a little strange, but we suspect that there might be less of a focus on the theoretical math content. So right now on the GMAT, number properties and kind of like theoretical math, evens, odds, positives, negatives, divisibility, and primes, often go really well with a data sufficiency question type. However, if this really is meant to be a data insights section, it seems that focus on theoretical math may not be maintained, and instead seeing more of data sufficiency that tests things like stat or understanding data analysis or literacy around things like sets and sequences and averages and weighted averages and that sort of thing. So again, we're thinking that the content would be a little bit more aligned with what the rest of that, what's already being tested in integrated reasoning. But we can't confirm that, right, until that new official guide is released. And so we're just hanging out waiting on that for now. Like, we're there with you, right? Like, we're waiting on that release date, same as y'all. But here, let's talk about what we can do to start to prepare for the data insights section with what we feel pretty good about. So let's start with data sufficiency. Data sufficiency is just going to be less important on the focus than on the legacy. There's just no way around that. With a cut of this size in the number of potential data sufficiency questions that we'll see, and the fact that data sufficiency is now being rerouted into data insights, it's going to be, in our mind, less important. It doesn't mean that it's not important, but it does have a somewhat lower weight. I think for a lot of people, this might, it depends, right? So for a lot of people, this might be a very good thing. Data sufficiency is a very good question type if you have great conceptual knowledge, but maybe aren't as good at applying that conceptual knowledge. Data sufficiency is brutal if you feel better at the nuts and bolts of formal math, but struggle a bit more with the abstractness of not really having boundaries around information. And so for some people, this is a good thing that data sufficiency is kind of shrinking in power. For other folks, it's not as good of a thing. So it's a bit of a mixed bag, but we do anticipate it'll be less important. We do, though, think that it will be the single most important question type within data insights, because it'll make up, again, we think 8 out of the 20 questions, whereas the other 4 questions will share the remaining 12, that remaining 60%. So our DS will be a very, very heavy part of that DI section, but not of the test as a whole. So it will shrink within the test, but will increase its weight within an individual section. But honestly, the takeaway here is going to be the same takeaway for everything. To do well, you have to at least master most of this stuff. So you have to be really confident with all 4 integrated reasoning question types and data sufficiency in order to be able to do well. So you really do have to at least, master the DS process. So you have to understand how this question type works. Now, in terms of integrated reasoning, here's what we think we know. Here's what we definitely know. On the legacy, these didn't count towards your overall score. Schools would look at your IR subscore, but it was not playing into the 2 to 800 legacy score. So on focus, they will in fact collectively account for about 20% of your overall score. So they matter now, right? They've gone from not really impacting to a fifth of your score. That's a big deal. And if schools look at subscores, which they typically do, if schools look at subscores, these play a 60% role in your data insight section. So, right, like these are a big deal. And each question type that we'll look at here now will only account for 2 to 4 questions at the most. So you really do have to have a nice spread of understanding around all the different question types. So our takeaway is that you will have to master at least 3 of the 4 of the question types. So in order to be able to really do well in this section, you'll have to be able to handle at least 3 out of the 4 integrated reasoning question types, if not all 4. So speaking of which, let's do that. Let's start to look at integrated reasoning questions. So there are 4 different types. And so we've got to work language a little bit here. There are 4 different prompts. So a prompt is the information provided. So I want you to think about most questions, quant and verbal, most questions have a prompt, which means upfront information that's been given. And then they have a question. So think about this for critical reasoning. A critical reasoning prompt would be the paragraph of text. And then you'd be asked a question like find the assumption or strengthen or weaken. Reading comp prompt would be the passage. And then you'd be asked the question. What's the main idea? What's an inference? In a problem-solving problem, the upfront text would be the prompt. And then you're asked a specific question that's usually kind of embedded in the prompt. And data sufficiency is sort of a weird organization of it. But we want to think about the fact that questions are made up of a prompt, and then there'll be specific questions asked about it. I say this because it's just like, reading comp is named after the prompt, not the type of question you're asked. And critical reasoning is named after the prompt, not the specifics of which type of question is asked. The same is true for the languaging around integrated reasoning questions that they are named not just by us, but by GMAC. They are called out by the prompt type, not the question that's asked. That said, just like in reading comp and critical reasoning, certain prompts have certain questions. So you don't usually see a reading comprehension question that comes with an explain a discrepancy question. And you don't normally see a critical reasoning prompt that comes with a main idea question. So certain prompts have certain question types. Now, what makes these data questions, these integrated reasoning questions so strange is that the questions themselves are also weird. They involve like clicking on things and drop-down menus. And so we are going to spend a little bit of the remainder of our time sort of talking about what these look like and solving 1 or 2 of them. And so the 4 types are tables. We've got multi-source reasoning. We've got graphics interpretation, and we have 2-part analysis. Yeah. So all of our we've got all kinds of fun, right? Question types. So under table analysis, the prompt itself will be a table, right? So we're going to have an actual table, and it's a table that you can sort. So it'll have a sortable, clickable link. In MSR, what's called multi-source reasoning, you'll have a 2 or 3 tab piece of information where you'll have to click from tab to tab to determine and to look at information that's interrelated. We've then got graphics interpretation, which, as its name implies, you'll have a graph. It's immovable. You'll just look at it and read it. And then our two-part analysis is going to be sort of a story at the top, much like critical reasoning or a quant problem would have. One thing to note, the two at the top, so tables and MSRs, you are actually going to need to click on the interfaces themselves, whereas graphics interpretation and two-part analysis are static. There's no clicky to them, right? They are what they are. Okay. So we'll look then in at each type. So we've got table analysis. Each prompt typically comes with a specific question format. So table analysis shows up with what's called an either or set. So an either or, it could be true, false, yes, no, can be proven, cannot be proven, can be inferred, cannot be inferred, but it'll be two choices. They'll be opposites, yes versus no, and three statements. And it'll always be three statements. And your job is to use the data from the table to assess whether each statement is true or false, yes or no, can be inferred, cannot be inferred, right? Like that's your job. Now, the thing to note here is that there is no partial credit, that in order to get credit for the table analysis question, right? So in order to get credit for this block of statements, you have to assess each statement correctly. For a graphics interpretation problem, right? So where you've seen a graph, there's a picture. The interface for answering these questions is drop downs. So you'll have one or two sentences that have two blanks. So it could be one sentence with two blanks or two sentences that have a blank each. You will have to click on the blank on the drop down to see the answer choices. And you should. These answer choices are often few in number and spread out with the intention of allowing you to eyeball and sort of scan the graph and not have to understand it intimately. Again, though, no partial credit in this set, in this, like anything that's on the screen at one time is considered one question. So you'll have the graph and then you'll have your blanks, typically below it. You have to get both blanks right to get credit for the question. If you miss either blank, you get the whole question wrong. Similarly, anytime you've got a bank of three statements, if you miss one statement, you get the whole question wrong. Now, when we look at MSR, MSR is the reading comprehension of the integrated reasoning question types. We say this because an MSR prompt, so the two or three tabs, will come with three questions that you'll see one at a time, just like on Reading Comp on the Legacy Edition and on the Executive Assessment. You'll see the MSR prompt and one question. You'll answer it, submit it, and then you'll keep seeing the MSR prompt. A second question comes up, you answer it. A third question comes up, you answer it. Okay. Now, the question types are mixed. Traditionally speaking, what you'll see is one traditional multiple choice and three set either ors. Okay. Again, for the either or, there'll be no partial credit. For a multiple choice, it's pick 1 in 5. So there's no, it's all or nothing for those question types. It is not the case that you have to get all three questions right to get credit for the MSR. Okay, so multi-source reasoning actually counts as three separate questions. Internally, each question is no partial credit, but just like on reading comprehension, you don't have to get all three reading comp questions right to get credit for the reading comp passage. You just have to get all the parts of one right to get credit for that one question. Last but not least, two-part analysis. These come in a few different flavors, and so we'll look a little bit at these, but these can look much like a quant problem. These might also look like a verbal critical reasoning style problem. And then there are some that look like logic, where it's not really verbal reasoning, it's not really math. It's more follow the instructions. Think like a GMAT version of, for those of you that have taken the LSAT, like logic games a little bit, but wildly easier, not nearly as complicated of a game. Now, two parts traditionally are meant to come with a two-part question, but they do at times come with the drop-down statement pair, like you would see with a graphics interpretation problem. So it's going to be one or the other. A two-part problem only ever has one question that you have to answer. That question might be made up of two blanks. That question might be made up of two columns. So the way this works, and again, it's why they call them two parts, you will have two questions. So this might be, what's the value for X, right? So you have like a quantitative question. Column A is, what is the value for X? Column B is, what is the value for Y? And then you come down and you choose from the same answer choices for each column. So you have the same 5 to 6 answer choices when picking a value for X, and the same 5 to 6 answer choices when picking a value for Y. So that's our like family, if you will, of integrated reasoning questions that we expect to see. Now, we're going to jump in and try one. We're going to try a table problem just to sort of see how this plays out. But what we wanted to highlight for you today was this kind of problem solving process that is going to be useful throughout the data and insight section, as well as the quant section. And so we subscribe to a problem solving process that is lovingly referred to as UPS: understand, plan, and solve. Right? Understand means that we take a little bit of time to maybe glance, get an eyeball on the problem, understand, like what type of question is this? What kind of information am I even given? What is it asking me for? Right? So I'm doing a little reading, and I'm also sort of jotting some initial things down on my paper. Notice I'm not doing a ton of work. Right now I'm game planning. I'm taking measurements. I'm getting a big picture. Once I have a big picture, next we plan, where we actually do some reflecting. We think about how we would want to organize the information on our paper. We consider what information that we know, what rules, facts, formulas, strategies that we're familiar with that would be useful here. And then kind of start to consider, do I want a table? Do I want a picture? Do I want equations? What am I looking for here? And then finally, we get to this point of solving, which is where we're doing the real work. We're trying to keep ourselves organized. And at any point, we're ready to bail if we feel like we've gotten stuck. And we're ready to bail, particularly in the plan stage, if we don't feel like we have a good idea for how to solve. So we're always looking for, is this a question I want to work on? And I'd like to know in the first minute and a half, if it is or not, right? If it's actually worth doing. And then for integrated reasoning question types, the key here is that we need to apply particularly this idea of understand, sitting back, taking a little time, soaking it all in, to both the prompt and then the question information itself. Again, much like reading comp, you spend time reading, kind of processing and internalizing, and then you answer the questions. Same thing is going to be true here as well. So what I'd love to do is so we're going to try a question. We're going to start with a table question today. And so let me get this up and running for you. Here we go. This is the one we want. So we are going to try out a table question, but grab your pen and paper. Be ready to take a deep breath. What I want you to think about is this idea of UPS, right? And I actually even want you to think of it as almost UPS, where we take time to understand what is the prompt, what's the information that we've been given. Then I take some time to understand what kind of question, like what are they asking me for? What am I supposed to be doing? Right. And so on. Take a little time to actually plan out how might I solve this, and then do the work to solve. So I'm going to have a timer going on my side. We'll take 2.5 minutes for you to try out this problem. Go ahead and put in the comments if you think you've got a solution. Go nuts. But here you go. Enjoy. All right. So if you think you've got an answer to any of the questions so far, then go ahead and type that into the chat. Love to hear from y'all. Okay. All right. Let's see. Okay. And then how does it feel for time? How did 2.5 minutes feel? Good, bad, indifferent, fast, slow? How did it feel? Hmm. Oh, is there not one? Did you not see one on the screen? Was this question not up on the screen for y'all to work on? Let's see. Let me try and reshare my screen again. Go ahead and type in the comments if the screen sharing wasn't sharing. Let me Try again. How about now? Let me know if y'all can see this now. It's showing it, but now it's showing that you can't see both. That's really strange. Try this one more time. There we go. How about now? Is that showing up? Let me see if y'all can see this. All right, let's try that. It looks like it's up on the screen. I'm not sure if there was a reason why it wasn't showing. But here we go. Let's give this one a shot. We'll take just a couple minutes in case you hadn't been able to see this one before. Looks like I'm seeing that you can see it, so hopefully it means that you can. And then we'll take just another couple of moments to try it out. All right. So let's take a look at this one and we'll run through the steps of this like UUPS. So understand. The first thing that we need to do is understand the prompt. So what type of problem is this? What information am I given? Do I need to map any of that information out onto my paper? But then I also need to understand each of the individual questions, things like keywords or what information is relevant in the table to me here, or which column do I need to sort by, because we are going to be able to sort. And then as we plan and then solve for each of our statements, what concepts or terminology, what formulas might apply here. We sort of use an acronym C for scan, like scan, sort, eyeball, and estimate. And then we solve. So let's start with understanding the prompt. So a first glance at the prompt tells me that we're dealing with commodities and some production and export pieces, right? We've got some columns for production and world rank, and exports percent and world rank. And so that's our columns, our rows, our specific commodities with upfront text that said that these are produced in Brazil. Yeah, these are Brazilian, right? We also read that upfront information, kind of incorporate that maybe we jot something down. Now, for a lot of tables, I don't jot down much, but you might make a quick note like Brazil com 09 or, products 09. And then my table is made up of integers. The rows are products. The columns are things like percents and rank. The table will always be defaulted to be sorted by the first column, whatever that is. So it'll always be sorted by the first column. And then we'll have a drop down that we can choose to sort by other columns. So next thing we want to do is take some time to understand the questions and the statements. So when we're working to understand questions and statements, we'll look here and say, all right, let's start with the first one. Let's kind of go into that first question and statement. So the first one says, no individual country produces more than 1/4 of the world's sugar. Okay, well, it's a yes/no question, like our whole thing is a yes/no question. Our first statement is some sort of fraction around production. Our second statement, something about if Brazil produces more than 20%, it has to be a top exporter. And the third is that the commodities, if Brazil has a #1 rank, it produces some percent of supply. So it sounds like at least for the second two, we're going to be comparing what's happening in columns. For the first one, it's something about individual countries, right? So let's start with the first one. No individual country produces more than 1/4 of the world's sugar. Okay, well, if no individual country produces more than one, like what I'm looking for here is the question says for the following statements, select yes if I can prove that this is true. Right? Yes, if I can prove that this is true. Now, that's a big deal to prove that something is true. That means I have to have definitive evidence to support that statement. And what seems a little strange to me here is that I don't have any information on any other country. This is entirely about Brazil. And so how could it be the case if I have a table that's only about Brazil that I could know anything about any other country? Well, let's look, right? Like produces more than 1/4 of the world's sugar. Okay, well, let's look at sugar production, right? So sugar production is the bottom row. And this is talking about a fraction, 1/4. So that's like a percent. And so let's look. Sugar, Brazil produces 21% of the world's share. Okay, so Brazil produces 21%. Also turns out that Brazil is #1 in production in the world. So if Brazil is #1 in production in the world, then how could any other country produce more than they do? So no country could produce more than 21% of the world's share, which means no country could produce more than 1/4. We can, in fact, prove that this is true. So our scratch work here would get us that this is definitely true. All right, so our first one, true. Let's look at our second statement. Second statement says, if Brazil produces more than 20% of the world's supply, okay, well, all right, here's production. I need to know who produces, if Brazil produces more than 20%, that's second column, then it is also the world's top exporter. So that would be exports, my fifth column. So let's sort by production world share and see what happens. So if we sort by production world share, we see that Brazil is over 20% in sugar, soybean, coffee, and OJ, and is in fact the world's top exporter in 3 of those, but not in all 4. And so we can prove that this statement is false. So we've got this statement, false. Last but not least, our third question, our third statement, of the commodities in the table for which Brazil ranks first, Brazil produces more than 20%. So we need to look at where does Brazil rank first in exports? So that's our column 5. If they rank first in exports, do they always produce more than 20%? So let's sort by exports and check world rank. So we do that. And while they do produce more than 20% in 3 of the 5 places where they rank more than 1, right? They don't in 2 places. And so once again, we can mark this as no. And so our overall solutions for this set, in order to get credit, would be yes, no, no. So a crucial element to our integrated reasoning question types is this: understand the prompt, understand the question, right? Spend some time making sure you understand what the prompt wants you to do, you understand what the question is asking you to do, and then it gives you the next space to plan and solve. Awesome. There are a ton of online materials. Legacy content is exactly applicable for the new test in the exact same way that you would just take out the geometry like we discussed briefly. And then you wouldn't study sentence correction if you're studying for the new focus. But we still have all sorts of great study material on our site that can help you get prepared for any of the questions that you'll see on test day. And as I mentioned, as soon as the new content comes out, and I'm not sure if this is sharing, it feels like some stuff is not sharing. I wanted to give you the coupon code. We have all kinds of starter kits that you can utilize. I'm not sure if y'all can see this, but feel free to join us at manhattanprep.com. Get hold of any and all of the study materials that we've got there that are applicable for the Legacy Edition. They're all still applicable for the GMAT Focus Edition. Again, skipping sentence correction and geometry. And for today, we've got a really great deal for y'all. Right now, if you use the code GMAT Club, so let me get this up for you. If you use the code GMAT Club, you can save GMAT Club 75. You can save $75 off of GMAT Interact or any complete GMAT GRE course. Those publicly listed on the site for not applicable for corporate or institutional courses, but definitely use the code to come hang out with us. If you have any questions at all, you're welcome to contact us 7 days a week at our phone number, or you're welcome to email us. Otherwise, thank you so much for coming and joining us today. I'm sorry if there was some glitchiness about getting a question up for you to practice. But otherwise, please reach out. Please come hang out with us. Come get yourself ready for both the Legacy and the Focus Edition. And hopefully we'll see y'all soon. Thanks so much, everybody.